Okay, everybody, let's please welcome to the stage Nick Timpson and Kevin Chang from Epitome. The title of their talk is Sustainable Workforces Are Built, Not Bought.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I know it's been a long series of very interesting and engaging talks. So I'm Kevin Chang, CEO of Epitome Global. I'm joined by Mr. Nick Timpson, our Strategic Growth Director. And I want to bring a slightly different conversation to all of you today, right? The title of our talk today is Sustainable Workforces Are Built, Not Bought. And today I want to talk about a very different angle regarding sustainability, right? At Epitome, we are a workforce optimization platform. So today, I want to talk a little bit about workforce sustainability and an angle of sustainability that I believe a lot of us leave out, right? Our people, right? Because every sustainability effort, every organization that has ambitious goals out there needs a way to understand its people. It needs a way to align its people with its purpose. And we believe that that is the secret to getting a lot of those initiatives that we are all pushing for, all these good things that we're trying to get out in the world, done, right? So have you ever watched an organization just lose a brilliant person, right? You could have put a lot of time and effort hiring the right person, right? But one day this person just stops being as engaged as they were, right? Maybe they were at the early stages of them being introduced into the organization, all full of purpose, right? Ready to make great things happen, ready to make sustainable batteries, ready to make sustainable landfills a reality, right? But one day they just had enough, they disappear, and you never really understand why. And the thing is, this is a situation, a problem that affects us all globally, right? And the fact is, right, if we look at our CFOs, we look to our CTOs, these guys can tell us to the pound, right, how much the value of the inventory you currently have at any given point of time, right? But the fact of the matter is this: we can value our buildings, our equipment, our technology, our intellectual property even, to the pound. But what about the potential of our people? What about how aligned they are to our values? What about how aligned they are to sustainability, for instance? The fact is, we struggle to even see it. And this is where I'm going to pass the stage over to our friend Nick Timpson over here, who's going to tell you about different dimensions to this issue.
Thank you, Kevin. So if you look at this through the eyes of a company, there are a number of challenges that we see in industry. And this is a really nice fitting to this audience in the sense that we're talking about sustainability. We're talking about organizations that are going through massive transformation, quite big disruption. If you look at the car industry, sort of moving to electrification, for example, we're looking at renewables. All of these come with new skills, new capabilities, new tasks that everyone needs to bring to the table. The challenge with organizations is just trying to keep up with this pace. So everyone knows traditional job titles, they know job descriptions, but actually that's kind of no longer fit for purpose in the sense that it is so dynamic, it's moving almost weekly, I would say. We look at the half-life of skills 10 years ago, and they were 5, 10, 12 years. If you look at the half-life of skills now, you're looking at 6 months, 12, 18 months before they change. So for organizations to keep up with this, it's a real moving feast, very difficult. It also requires a level of restructuring, and I think the two middle points go together very well because you've got AI disruption and automation coming into any business and every organization, whether organizations want it or not. It's here and it's growing and it's being, it's growing exponentially. For organizations to how to figure out where that fits within the organization, where those real efficiencies are, I think are a real challenge. But the other side of that is, how does that affect the organization when they look at their human assets, their employee base, in terms of how that needs to change, how people need to reskill, which tasks within which roles are going to get automated, for example. So there are sort of real issues there in terms of that moving feast. We know that organizations are constantly under pressure on this as well. And one of the most pressing points that we see is organizations making headcount reductions. The thing about headcount reductions, it's usually reactive about, well, we know that AI is coming in, and so these roles become redundant. The reality is many organizations either suddenly have an upturn in the next 6 to 12 months, or they just get it wrong, right? And that leads to organizations then having to rethink and rehire at a huge cost. So when we talk about sustainability, actually this plays a really big part in terms of the way organizations should be rethinking at this. But the challenge I think we see with organizations is they don't know what they don't know. They know they need to figure this out, but they just don't have the data available to them to make those sort of informed discussions and decisions. And this is where this really sort of comes in, is helping organizations really understand that landscape and how it changes over time. What we're trying to avoid is for leaders of organizations flying blind into this future. If you look at it from the eyes of the individual, there's another challenge. It's not just about layoffs or redundancies or my job roles changed. It's actually many employees feel very invisible within organizations. They feel like they're not really heard. And I think there's a truth to that, because if you are employed by an organization, they know more about you on your first day of employment than they do 2 years down the line. Because most organizations, they just lose visibility of the capabilities, the skills, and the talent they have within their businesses. So from our perspective, having a finger on the pulse in terms of how that looks and how that changes over time, and having a dynamic, visible look of what good looks like, not just from a skills lens, but what do you bring to the table? What are your behaviors? What are your leadership skills? What's your aptitude to the organization? What are your coping mechanisms in times of pressure? All of these things are really critical for organizations to know what people they have, but also for individuals to feel supported within the business. So that brings us on to that sort of feeling overlooked within the business. Not really heard, not really seen in terms of what their capabilities are. Most organizations look at people based on the job role they have now, not the skills that they developed over their entire career. So having that visibility of the capability and the whole individual is really key. The other side of that is people just leaving organization, as Kevin has said. It's often a decision that's been made over time, takes organizations by surprise. Organizations have no visibility of this, because the one thing that comes into play at that point is exit interviews, and exit interviews never tell the truth. No one wants to burn bridges. So how do you really sort of keep an eye on what the individual requirements are, how people need to be supported, what does their career look like, or what are their aspirations for career that the business needs to be looking at, in order to have that visibility about how you can support, how you can develop people, and how you can allow them to progress, develop, and get promotions within the business. All of those we feel are missing. On that note, I'm going to pass back to Kevin, but key from our point of view when we look at people, and you may think, what does it mean in terms of sustainability? Because we measure all of these aspects, right? But organizations, if you look at annual reports based on we're going through 20% growth, we are having this strategic aim, all of that has to be developed by the people in the organization, and it's the one aspect of any business that's not actually measured. It's the people who have to develop or deliver on the strategy of the organization that's set by the CEO and the board. But the organization finds that that is the one aspect that's never actually measured. So how do we get around that in order to help organizations and individuals understand the part they need to play, and how organizations can reach their strategic goals if they have that invisibility? On that, I'll pass back to Kevin.
All right. So what does a sustainable workforce or sustainable organization look like, right? Before we get to that, let's talk about what we see every day in the news these days, right? You hear of tech giants, you hear of all these large companies prioritizing shareholder value and short-term goals. And what they do, they, at the flick of a switch, incur large, massive layoffs. And we feel that a lot of these companies are doing so because they don't see any other better way, any more surgical tool to achieve their immediate objectives, right? They may have to restructure, they may have to reorganize as key, important, near short-term priorities, right? But they've got a really, really blunt tool, right? These large layoffs. And as Nick mentioned, we can measure all of these things very well, and there clearly is, and what we've been working on in Epitome for more than 10 years now, is building deeper level whole person intelligence that helps organizations really understand their people on a deeper level, right? And right now, what organizations know about their people are inputs, data that they collect and that they push onto these people, right, to their workforces, right? You know exactly how much you pay them, you know exactly what kind of skills you filter their resume for, but we don't see that full picture because there is so much that's being left out from that perspective, right? Do you actually know why someone wakes up every day to come to work, right? Do you know their actual values? Do you know their personalities and how they interact in teams, right? And our thesis here at Epitome is very, very simple, that there is a huge, huge blind spot over here when it comes to organizations trying to understand their people and putting and making that part of a sustainable workforce system. And once you're able to truly understand someone's motivations, how they tick, why they wake up, and what kind of purpose they have to show up at work every day, that's how you manage to go and solve all those difficult workforce problems that we hear about every day in the news, right? And the cost is severe, right? When people leave like this, when we incur these huge, massive layoffs, there's immense amounts of lost knowledge, preventable attrition, stalled organizational growth, and when you start to hire again, the costly recruitment fees just keep adding up. So this is our vision for a sustainable workforce, right? We believe that number one, right, and this is what we've been focusing quite a lot at Epitome for the past 10 years, really understanding your workforce and understanding them as people, not employees, right? How do you do that? Understand them not just from their CV perspective or their work perspective, but go deeper, right? Understand their work values, their motivations, their purpose, as well as their capability, right? And how have we systemized and delivered this with Epitome? We've implemented a whole series of workforce assessments to understand, right? Within just a short 10-minute assessment, the essence of an individual's personality, their career interests, and their preferences. And we have a whole series of deeper assessments to go in deeper into their work values, their skills, and their competencies and more. But once you have a clear idea of that individual, where do you go next? Next, when you understand where someone needs to go, where they want to grow towards, that's where support comes in, right? And the fact of the matter is, when we work with large multinationals, this is one area in which they struggle a lot, right? Because they know from an organizational perspective how I need to grow my leaders, right? But they lack that individual perspective. And later I will show you an example where in a project that we did with a large government in Southeast Asia, we increased, right, the completion rate of e-learning and compliance to the courses from 11% all the way up to 80%, just because we really understood what each and every civil servant in the country wanted to achieve from their career and relied on that on recommendations, not just what the skills framework or the organizational KPIs required of them. And finally, right, the fact of the matter is we are all living in a fast-changing environment, right? Right now, AI is around, and what that has created for all of us in the knowledge workspace is that workflows are being forced to change tremendously. And when workflows change, organizational structures have to change if a company is to continue to stay relevant, right? But the fact is, we believe at Epitome that most companies are not because they do not have that insight into what their people can actually do, what they're actually capable of, they fire too quickly and they then are forced to rehire. We believe that a sustainable workforce means that when a company pivots, you are able to then pivot with your people standing right behind you and with you, right, to that new mode. And you can only be there if you continually align them to your purpose, you continually align them to your organizational values. So that brings me to two very interesting case studies that we've implemented with Epitome. The first is a very interesting case, right? We actually worked with a large airline and they were forced, right? Because this was during the COVID pandemic, right? They were grounded, right? And 3,000 flight crew had to be retrenched because planes were not flying, there was no jobs for them, shareholders were getting very antsy. So what do? We managed to convince this airline to say, stop. Instead of initiating this sweeping layoff, let's try to understand these people a little bit better first. Let's go beyond your current rubrics and understand what your people are really interested in and also what they're capable of. We implemented our Epitome assessments and within just 4 weeks, right, we managed to redeploy and stop 87% of this whole group of people from being retrenched by redeploying them in new roles in the airline subsidiaries as well as in related businesses. Because we went a bit further, we took a little bit more time to understand what these guys actually could do, what they're actually interested in, what kind of preferences they had, and match that against the larger talent pool, right? So during COVID, we managed to go and turn flight staff, flight crew, we converted them and placed them in customer service roles, CSR roles, some sustainability roles that were actually being rolled out to support, right, the larger COVID crisis. And the other case study I already mentioned pretty briefly, right? When we really go in depth to understand the individual and understand their career goals and know where they're actually, what they're actually working towards, we are then able to better recommend learning and content to them. So this is actually a project that we did, which is a whole of government project for a Southeast Asian government. We implemented this system, Epitome, for more than 140,000 civil servants there. And the key problem that they had was that civil servants were just not interested in signing up and completing courses and progressing in their careers through the nationally mandated skills framework. So when we came in, we managed to actually increase the completion rate of courses from 11% all the way up to 80% because we aligned the courses, the learning, with the actual preferences, interests, and values of each and every civil servant, and we mapped it at national scale. So to wrap it up, this is what we do every day with our clients, right? We help them build a sustainable workforce, and we use these 4 simple steps in what we call the workforce intelligence loop that compounds over time. And we hope that, maybe this is something that you could take in back with you and implement in your own organizations. We start with understanding each person, map real capability to each individual, understand their values, understand their preferences, understand them as real people. With that knowledge and that information, move on to develop. Help develop and support, people as our most precious resource and help support their growth to real achievable objectives that they can move towards and are excited about. Optimise, right? As all of us, in the sustainability space, in the corporate space and more, Everyone's in this time of disruption will have to continually change. So move your people to the right places and at the right moment. And finally, continually track outcomes, track your individual people's purpose, values, preferences, and skills over time, so you can continually optimize this whole loop. So we believe that this is a new layer for sustainable organizations. This is a new way of doing things that gives better fit for your teams, better engagement for work and for life, and for better growth for businesses. And this is why we at Epitome believe sustainable workforces are not just hired, they are built carefully by better managers who are looking at a more human way of growing their workforces. So if I can leave you with just one question, right, to take back home, ask yourself when you're dealing with your team, how well do you really know your people, and can you do that little bit more to make your workforce a sustainable one? Thank you. Yep.
Are there time for questions at all?
This question. Yes, please. Any questions? You delivered such a fine talk.
In the places where you've actually implemented this or tested it out, how much sort of resistance are you getting from the middle management sort of areas? I mean, I used to run quite large parts of Barclays, and you were very much kind of reliant on your managers, who very much were the people that were summarising the people below them. And, you know, I was intuitive enough to understand that obviously quite often there's an axe to grind, or they truly haven't got an understanding of their people. Have you seen much resistance in that space, and therefore has it brought some surprises to the companies that you've implemented this in?
Yes. I think when we engage with customers, the key point is that stakeholder engagement has to be top-down approach. You have to get the leadership on board with it, because that cascading down is super important. From our point of view, it's also understanding the culture of any organization. So if you look at it from a point of view of career development and advancement, it means that you could move across the business. It is not always up, which means you get managers who lose good people in their teams. There's often resistance at that point. There's also resistance because people don't know if they'll be able to backfill if someone moves to another department. So understanding all of those sides of culture within an organization, making sure that senior management are aware of those perceived or real issues, that we can then put plans in place in order to mitigate those, I think is actually super important, because the purpose of this is achieving outcomes. And if there are blockers in the way to stop you achieving outcomes, even if you've invested in this, then actually that's going to be rather self-cannibalizing as an initiative. So you're absolutely right. But we do take that very importantly. The other side of it is working with organizations around their common strategy to make sure people are aware that the reason why they're doing assessments is not they're being judged. They're not looking at, who's the next on a spreadsheet. It's around development. It's around aligning to the strategic goals of the business. And the personal advantages of the individual to do that, because it actually helps them individually rather than just the organization. Yeah.
Yep.
Can we have a more difficult one?